Are you recording?
Can't you see the little thing, the little
Ah,
record
now I
button?
can. And when I share the screen, it becomes a smaller dot. It's in a
Okay,
different place today.
okay.
Things keep getting better and better.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining, logging in, sharing this time. And the lecture today, or the I guess maybe stories today, are memories from the guru, or memories about Audley and experiences I've had, and stories from the subtle and the causal realm is probably a better way to describe them. And it's all based on, Audley's teaching as I experienced it or perceived it. Um, sometimes we perceive things that may be different than what's actually communicated, but that's our own filters and our own perception. But it gives me that view of the world. And I think to start with, I would like to do a brief meditation, and this is just centering and stilling the mind. Um, if we do this, I like to take typically 3 deep breaths. Breathe in, and then just relax and breathe out. Breathe in, relax, and breathe out. And then for the third time, breathe in, fill the lungs, fill the diaphragm, fill the body with life force, with air, and breathe out. Then if you focus your concentration or your attention at the top of the head, and just center there for a couple of moments. And if you've practiced Kriya Pranayama in the past, it's a good time to run the Kriya energy, balance the energy in the body. And if you can feel the life force entering the body at the top of the head as you breathe in, and as you exhale, it actually moves in and out, the life force through the top of the head. And the normal movement of the energy into the human body is about a 24-hour cycle, where the energy is flowing in and the energy is flowing out. If you monitor your breath closely, you can find that even one nostril will open and be full aware or full capability to breathe in. When one side of the nostril is open, often the other one shuts down. You breathe, and every couple of hours that shifts into which one is the dominant flow of energy. And if the chi is balanced in the body and the life force is balanced, it's very regular and it's very peaceful, and it moves in and it moves out. And as part of the teaching, we try to become aware of the life force, to feel that energy, that awareness come into our body, inhabit the body. We try to then direct the sense perception inwardly. Instead of focusing on the sounds in the world around you, begin to focus on the inner sounds. If you relax in this way, it brings great peace into the body, and it helps you to know the source of your being. Anytime I study or meditate or practice or lecture, I like to, wherever possible, start with a brief centering meditation. just to bring all the parts of my being in alignment. Then I like to direct my attention to the teacher, to Audley, to the guru. And in this screen or this slide, we have an image that his radiant form is looking back, but you can concentrate on that image and go deeper into the self. Any enlightened being or any teacher that has touched that source, if you concentrate on the form or the image or the name, the word, you can go through that form into it, that same oneness. And this is Dr. Thin, Audley's guru and teacher. Also, you can follow that stream and go right back into the self. And then most important, Audley always assured me, don't believe a word I say. If you believe me, you'd believe any damn fool. And that's a constant reminder and constantly helps me to keep focus on what I am, what my own awareness is, what my own life is. And then I shared this last time. I wanted to just touch on it quickly. The three bodies, the part highlighted in yellow, coming from Dr. Thin's work, Radiant Road to Reality. But he references the three bodies, the gross, the subtle, the causal, and attains to this region. And it's the path, the tested science of religion is to become aware of those bodies, become aware of that presence, and then go deep in and find the source of it. And as I pointed out, there's a lot packaged in that paragraph, and I'll do more detail in a later lecture. One thing I would encourage each of you, if you haven't read the text called Doctorji, it's the life, teaching, and legacy of Dr. Thin. It's a nice text, well written, and gives a good overview of his life and his experience, and being born in India, coming to the US, and as really a very young man, and then teaching, going to school. I actually went to Berkeley, got degrees in literature, English, theology, religious science, and then used that as a basis in his teaching. And then there was one interesting quote in this text, and it's I'd like to read through it. I think it's kind of fascinated me, but it gave me a different view of life. And it said, at the railway station in Amritsar, Dr. Thin's father said to his son as he was leaving, and this was March 5th, 1912, when he was 20 years old, he said, promise me four things. First, neither beg nor borrow, no matter what happens. Second, never commit adultery. Third, neither smoke nor have anything to do with any kind of intoxicating drinks or drugs or narcotics. And fourth, never live in the past. However beautiful it may be or however ugly, wipe the slate and start life anew every morning. If necessary, have a funeral, put some flowers, dig up a grave, bury your past. Don't keep whining about your fate and blaming it on others. Live always in the eternal one and start life ever anew. And that's, I thought, very good advice. But to drive home the real impact or imprint of it, he says, I hope if you follow these teachings I have given you, you will make a success in life. If you cannot, the sooner you perish, the better for me, for you, for me, and the rest of the world, because I do not want a weakling to survive me. My children should not be weaklings or jellyfish. Then is said to have looked levelly at his father and responded, Father, your heroic blood runs in my veins. I will be faithful and true, and I cannot fail. Mr. Thin gave the young man a small amount of money, saying, son, this is all I have I can give you right now. I have given you an education and an example. Make your own way in life. And with that, he put him on the train and sent him on a rather long journey. He ended up spending a number of months in the Philippines, working some there to provide for his passage on to the U.S. to go to school, and then arrived in Seattle. That's on page 6, paragraph 2 of that text. I think it's something, it's a charming little example. My father said something similar to me about giving me an education and skills and the ability to work and to learn and to make things in life. He didn't say the part about the weaklings or the jellyfish, but that's because he probably knew I was more sensitive in nature. But I think it's interesting to see the cultural differences and to see how the father, spoke to the son, and how the son responded in coming to the West so that he could teach. Now, the path that he taught, and I've referenced this a lot of times, won't go into detail, but the dedication, discipline, devotion, and then the discrimination, and then the meditation that we just did, becoming aware of the life force and the sound current. And then I always like to go through this. Audley suggested I read this every day, and I have tried to do that since the time he gave it to me in 1972. But it says, to walk in truth, I must be honest, courageous, and adaptable to my environment. Be brief, see and act with the issues of my environmental life condition. Try always to do a little more than is expected of me. Don't leave things undone that can be finished in the time given to each job. Review at the end of each day and clear your mind by forgiving and asking forgiveness when needed. Maybe I should add to that now, bury the past if necessary, dig a grave, and make more of a ceremony out of it. Then try not to make wild claims, be sensible and clear. Don't let the personality be too eager. Surrender to life's unfolding pattern set by the divine current. And I think this is very much in alignment with the advice that Dr. Thin's father gave him, and in a sense, the spiritual father gave to us. And then a key thing that I focus on, and it's a lot of the focus is there because of the teaching as I perceived it and the awareness, what was going on, but it was a real effort or a charge, in a sense, to validate the path of meditation. And it's just like in the text, The Radiant Road to Reality, Dr. Thin, it's the tested science of religion. He refers to it often, even in the book Doctorji, and a lot of these, I'm surprised as I go back and look at these that I get a lot of this same thing, but basically saying that if the knowledge can't be used and applied to your life, it's not really worth much. And so understand the information or the teaching, and then test the information. Does it work? Is it accurate? Is it clear? Does it help you find the source of your being? Does it help you to find the source of the life current? And then is it correct? If it is in error, correct it. And I know his drawings, he was constantly changing them, adding to them, refining them. And that's been very much my experience with the path, is some things I find don't work exactly that way as I understood it, or I perceived it, or I read it, or I heard it in a lecture. So if I can find a better way to do it, a better description, a better metaphor, then use that, and use the best possible metaphors and analogies to describe the path, and explain things in current scientific, linguistic, and religious terms. Since I first met Audley 50 years ago, a lot's changed in the world, especially in the scientific world. And there's a lot of metaphors that are used very commonly now in metaphysical discussions and knowledge, things like entanglement or relativity, or the edge of the universe, or the movement of time, the light as a particle, light in the being, light being sensed in the brain. All these things are there, but these weren't available in the world until the last 40 or 50 years. And so they can be used to make it more easy and clear and concise, so you can get a better understanding, and then accurately use diagrams, drawings, illustrations, maps, tables, any way you can to help people understand what they are and what the source of life is. And give examples in supporting scientific information for meditation and correlates in the brain, in the mind between the meditative states, the states of awareness, and what's happening in the physical body or the physical form. And there'll be future lectures going into more detail on some of these. And then I like to always start with the base of the waking consciousness, gross ego, dream consciousness, the subtle mind or subtle state, sleep, deep sleep, no dreams, causal, manifesting first forms, archetypes, and then turiya, the fourth state, the witness. No matter how deep you are asleep, if somebody shakes you and wakes you up, or you wake up from a frightening or a very pleasant dream, you realize that there's some part of you that is always witnessing what's going on. And then there's the fifth state where the witness, the turiya, dissolves into everything that is witnessed or into everything that is arising. And when that state occurs, it's a very different state of consciousness and an all-encompassing, all awareness, being a sense of being one with all things, and can be quite interesting to experience, can be quite difficult to experience. Sometimes people experience it, or beings that get to that level experience it as a separate state, kind of as their own oneness with all things. And others, and the experiences I've had in just touching some of that, it's an overlay. I see the physical world, I see the gross world, the subtle world, and then all of a sudden I have an awareness of being a part of all of it. And some of these are states that you just touch or taste for a brief moment, and you're able to do something with them. Others are states that they may be more like a peak experience. You touch it, you feel it, you become aware of it. You merge into that oneness, maybe walking in nature, walking by the sea, walking in a forest, uh, sitting in a deep meditation. There's a lot of ways to touch it. Peak experiences of any type, even physical, athletic experiences, performing at very high levels. People go into an altered state, sometimes referred to as the zone, to where the time slows down. They can be aware of all things happening at once and in control of it. And then there's a little table that just summarizes that. I use it, to keep it on the wall just for my own reminder. These will be made available to anyone who wants them. And then the stories that I wanted to share. Some of these are very short stories. Some of them are longer instances, but what they are is a summary of some of the experiences that I had with Audley, and some of them are more physical in nature, or they start off with a physical component, and then as the situation progresses, it turns into much more of a subtle awareness experience. And then in the first meeting with him at the New Age Center in Oklahoma City, it ended up being a state that kind of touched on all the levels of being, but also a memory of my past life, a memory of Audley being my teacher in a prior time, and moving toward Oklahoma City. But each of these states, or each of these experiences, they all introduce me to a different component of it. And one of the reasons that I've tried to combine these and put them together is that as I share the subtle state experiences or the causal state experiences that I may have touched or been blessed to experience, when sometimes only in his presence. It's not like these are the sort of things that anytime you want, you can turn it on. But when he was so deeply ingrained into the self that when just in his presence, in thinking about it, in thinking about the effect on my own life, and I encourage each of you, if you had met him and knew him, to think about the experiences that you had when you were in his presence, or when you recall the memories of the time that you had with him. There will be often aspects or components of the experience that are simply physical. Like I drove to a place in Oklahoma City called the New Age Center on the northeast side of Oklahoma City. That was a very physical, something that happened in the gross realm. And it was just by coincidence that I ended up being there, taking a roommate home from college at the end of a semester. And my father having told me that sometime I should stop in the New Age Center, I might find something there that was interesting. And my father had a lot of experiences in remote viewing and healing. He was very fond of the teachings of Edgar Cayce and read a lot of his books, and actually worked with the US government in remote viewing or map dowsing to find lost military planes and stuff like that. That was a key part of his life. But as those were physical components that merged into the subtle aspects. But when I went to the Oklahoma City in this physical experience, and then I walked in, and I was early, as I have shared before, and Charlie Rhodes, the founder of the center and the director of it, said that the best meditation teacher in Oklahoma City was going to be lecturing that night on meditation. And I'd always had an interest in learning how to meditate, and I thought, this is my lucky day. And then as we progressed through it, there were lots of subtle experiences in that he was very much aware of the experiences that I had had that brought me to that point, of a lot of experiences with out-of-body experiences that left me kind of lost in a sense and not understanding my role in life or the unfoldment of life, of the life process. And as I sat there and he explained the kingdom, he had just completed his drawing of the kingdom and the great supreme. Those two, he had both drawings with him that night. And he was clearly very proud of them, but used them to explain what had happened to my life. And for me, it was an altered state experience, in that even though there were other people there, it was just like he was talking specifically to me, and the questions that I had in my mind or in my heart were answered. One, he just kind of ticked them off one after the other. And I thought, this guy really, really knows his stuff. And then when we meditated, each thing that he described in the meditative process, it was very much alive and active. The subtle components of it and the causal components, when he referenced that I might see lights, whatever he would say, I had usually just seen that. It's like he was watching my meditation and what was going on and what I was experiencing. And that's one of the gifts of the teacher. A lot of times they can tune into the student and know exactly what's happening to you and what's going through your mind and what you're doing. And then as I have shared at other times, when we started the meditation, we did the energy flow, and it felt very powerful, and I could feel it throughout my body. When we listened to the sounds and looked at the lights were brilliant, and the sounds were heavenly or celestial in a true sense, and truly remember. And then when we sat quietly and just in the peaceful meditation, I began to see a scene where I was with 4 other officers on a ship in World War II. We were in the Pacific Ocean, and one of the officers pointed out into the water, and there were 2 torpedoes coming at the boat or at the ship, and we were blown up, and I was flying through the air and then drifting, lost consciousness, floating in the water, sinking into the depths of the ocean. And in that instant, I remembered that Audley was my guru, that he was a teacher. He was someone that I knew. And when I thought of that, I was flying through the air and found a place in Oklahoma where, when I became of age, I would find him. And I took birth there and could see it all very clearly, and was just kind of speechless afterwards. Didn't share that experience with anyone. And about 10 years later, I was riding along in his little car. I would often drive in places, and he started talking about the reason he had decided to be a teacher. And he said the primary reason was he saw many of the young men, especially, come back from war. And when they came back from war, they were really broken and damaged in various ways. And he could see that they needed a lot of help. And he said some were from World War II and some were from the Vietnam era war that had not been killed, but had been damaged badly and suffered PTSD or other problems. And he said he felt a great need to be of service to the soldiers that had been troubled by war. And as he began to explain it more and more, he said, some of the students, and he referenced several of the students in the class that were had either died in World War II or had traumatic experiences from the wars in between that had impacted their life and their ability to get things done. And he listed a few of the people, and some I were aware of, some I knew, and that's probably another story for another time. But then he said, he nudged me with his elbow and said, you remember these things. The first time you meditated, you saw what happened in your past life. And that was the first time he ever acknowledged that experience that I'd had. But it was very clear and very real to me, and it helped me put other pieces of my being together. But as I remembered him, he was clearly helping me and guiding me, and provided a very useful teaching for me to live in my life. And then some of the other things, I've tried to label these as like thumb-sized people floating in the sky, 3 priests and a lady. One of Audley's students was very gifted in many ways in the subtle realm. He could do all sorts of manifestations or magical things, or find information or do things. And shortly after I began meditating with him, and when we would have the classes, and in time there were a group of students, maybe 15, 20 students, and we would go and have a dinner afterwards. After a lecture, we would go and have coffee or things. And I still am amazed that we would go have coffee at 9:30 in the evening, and I'd somehow or another, in those days, I could still sleep after drinking coffee at that hour. But in one of the students that this student that Audley worked with a great deal, and he was a very capable man. He suggested I work with him, and he said he can teach you lots of things. And I was a little hesitant in some ways, but Audley assured me that everything would be okay, and he could take care of anything that might come, because this particular student had some interesting powers, is probably at best. But I would go to his place in the evening after my work, and I'd usually finish the day, and I'd stop by the monument company where Audley was working and see him. And then I would go on to this friend's house, and we would meditate for a while. And the first few times that I went, it's like we'd sit down for meditation at 8 or 9 in the evening. And then the next thing I would remember would be the sun coming up in the morning. And after a few days of this, and when the sun would come up, I was often a little tired, but the friend had phenomenal amounts of energy, and he would just put energy into my body, place his hands on my shoulder, and I'd be ready for another 2 or 3 days with no sleep. Kind of an interesting thing. But in one of these experiences, we were traveling, and we had actually, Audley had suggested that we go see Babaji. And that was one of the things that we were trying to do was visit Babaji. But as we went in, I began to notice that in the kind of like in the peripheral vision, or in the experience in my mind, the edge of my visual field, I began to notice that we weren't the only beings there. And I like to go back and look at some of these, because these experiences help me to see the subtle nature. And remember from what I said before, that in the subtle realm, one of the ways that you can differentiate what's going on there is there are no objects in the sense that don't have light. And sometimes it's described as there's no trees, there's no rocks, there's no roadway, there's no path. It's just like images are, in a sense, floating in space or in a darkness, but they are in the awareness. And in my upper left-hand field of view, kind of in the peripheral of that, I noticed that there were 3 priests and a young lady that were observing and watching. And I began to realize that they had been observing and watching for several days. And I recognized the lady in the company that I was working with. The owner's wife was the lady that I was seeing in that image. And so I went the next day and, did my duties in the work. And I talked to the lady and I said, uh, I was surprised to see you in my meditation. And she said, I was very concerned about you. And I said, well, who were the priests? And she said, those are priests, those are friends that I've had in a church that I used to be a part of. And it was a Catholic church. And 2 of them were from Northern California, and one was from a church that she had visited in Kansas with the other 3, and they had all gone to school. And she said these priests had lots of abilities and powers to do exorcism and all that sort of thing. But she said they too were concerned after she explained to them, and all this is happening in the subtle realm. And for me, when I say thumb size, about the size of the thumbnail, they're small beings floating in the air. And again, a very subtle experience. And the interesting thing was, it is the friend that I was meditating with, he did not see the lady or the priest. And I asked him about it the next day. Was there did he see any other people? And he said, no, he didn't see any. He said, I have a lot of power. I can protect everything. So there's nobody here. And I thought that was strange. So I went and talked to Audley and said, Audley, explain this to me. And he said, well, the lady is also a student of Babaji from a long lifetime, many lifetimes, and has worked with him in the past. And he said she senses that there is some danger in what you're doing, but it's part of the things it's the lessons that you need to learn right now about how the subtle realms work. And he said the priests are priests that have worked with her and have worked with her throughout time. And so it's, you're in good hands. Don't worry about it. Just say hello to her. And like he knew her also. And so I took the book Autobiography of a Yogi the next morning, and I took it to the lady, and I said, talked to her, and I said, I saw you again last night when I was in the meditation. And I said, and I had the sense that you might like this book. And she looked through the book, thumbed through it, quickly saw the picture of Babaji that's in the Autobiography of a Yogi, and threw the book on the floor. And she was quite upset because she thought that Babaji was a guru or a teacher that only she was aware of. She said she had seen him since she was a small child, and he had been a constant guide or help in her life. And she was disappointed to see that other people were aware of him too. And she had a different name. She did not call him Babaji, but she referred to him in a different way, as a different teacher, but was very much aware of it. So again, subtle experiences, dream world, objects with no shadows, not extra objects that don't have their own light within them. They simply don't exist in the subtle world. And the nice thing about the subtle world, and why that's often, when we look at chakras, for example, we have the root chakra, which is our gross physical form. Then we have the causal level, the crown chakra, the oneness with the self. And then everything else in between is lumped into the subtle, and that's in the subtle because all of those can be experienced in the dream or in the mental aspect, the mental component of it. So again, a subtle experience. And as I describe these experiences, you may have a recall of your own subtle experiences in your life. What was seemed like maybe a memory or an experience that you may have had that left you unfulfilled or unknown, uncertain in some way about what was going on. And maybe it's like an out of body experience. Maybe it's a premonition, something's going to happen. Maybe it's a memory from another time when you meet someone and you think, I really know this person. There's not only the physical connection, like we're in the same room at the same place in the same time, but I can remember other things that we've experienced throughout time. And we all have multiple people that we run into in our lifetime that we've had experiences with before. Sometimes if we're open to that subtle awareness, we have memories that are associated with that. Sometimes it can be quite confusing. It may have been someone you were married to in a previous lifetime, and now they're with someone else, and all of the feelings and the things don't mix and match properly. But that's why we have some guidelines in terms of how we should interact in relationships with people and do it in the present time. Having awareness in the subtle and the causal and the gross all at the same time can lead to confusion, and some people just get lost. They can't sort out the worlds, and which is the present time that they're living in and trying to fulfill their own dharma and their own creative learning process, but they may be living part of another life, not being in the now. And so it comes back to the good advice that Dr. Thin's father gave him, wipe the slate clean every day, start anew. Another one, the same individual that I just referenced, the student that I was spending quite a lot of time with, and he had another ability that was the ability to manifest objects. And I saw this happen a number of times in where he would manifest things that would impact the physical world. One day he was at my apartment and concentrating on a candle that I had lit. And as he concentrated on the candle, he said he was concentrating on one side. And so the candle grew much brighter. It's like there was a small wind blowing the flame of the candle against the side of the candle, and it was meditating much faster. And then it was like a big flare, almost like not an explosion, but really an expansion of the light that was coming from the candle, and it kind of filled the room, and then the candle went out. And in that process, there was also a picture of a lion that was on the wall. It was originally a poster from the group Santana. I think it was even an album cover. But in that image, as the friend was doing things with the candle and with the energy, he was able to pull that image out of the lion and actually manifest it in the room where we were meditating. And he said, "This will be a friend of yours for a few weeks." And I thought, now this is interesting. Like, how do you keep a lion, or what do you do with them? And I was driving a pickup at the time, and when I went places, the lion would go out and jump in the back of the truck. And when I would go into some areas, if there were lots of dogs, the dogs would start chasing the truck and barking at it. And some areas, people turned away. They could sense it. It was a strange presence. And Audley thought it was quite fascinating. I drove over to his monument company the next day and told him about it. And he said, "Well, is it in the back of your car?" And I think maybe we should have, Mary help us with the mental health component. And I said, yeah, he's in the back of the car, in the back of the truck. And he went out, and Audley could interact with the lion. And, I don't know if it was just for my benefit or whatever, but he was able to calm the lion and just put it to sleep. And things like this. But there were, again, experiences from the subtle realm where a form in the mind or in the mental plane, a form was created by someone, and all of us have that ability. Some people can do it more than others, but some people, maybe less degree, but some can manifest into the physical. And I think we all do. Even the whole teachings and the law opulence, the law of success, we learn to use the mind to create, often by focusing on a single image of what we want to manifest, and we begin to do the actions and the things to get that to manifest. It's useful to manifest a lion that it only stays around for 2 or 3 weeks and then vanishes. But that's how things happen sometimes. But it's not necessarily a practical skill. You probably can't get a job doing that unless you can do it in such a way that it frightens lots of people. And there may be people around doing that. But again, subtle experiences helping to differentiate between the physical world and between the subtle world. And it's kind of fun. And then another thing, one of the next things, I'd already referenced Babaji a little, but service and devotion to Babaji. And this was something at one point, Audley asked a few students to his home for a meditation. And the invitation that I got, or the request, he said, come over on Tuesday night, like at 7 o'clock. And I went, and George Proctor was there, and Gary Clinton was there with Audley, and we went in his meditation room after a while, and we meditated, and he took us to see Mahavatar Babaji, referenced in the autobiography of Yogi. And the picture here is actually a picture that was, it's a copy of a picture that was given to Audley by Ram Dass when he visited Oklahoma City. And he talked with Audley, and he understood Audley's devotion, and he said, oh, he had something in his car. And this was an original picture of Babaji that was had been found by Baba Hari Das, a teacher of Ram Dass, and he had given it to him and said, he'll protect you while you're traveling. And Ram Dass had placed it on the dash of his car, and it. Some of you may have the book, Hari Khan Baba, about Babaji. It's a small book that Baba Hari Das wrote about Babaji. And the picture is the clean version there. This one is aged quite a lot. And you can see it's aged more over time, but it's been passed around to those who need it. But when we went into this meditation and went to see Babaji, again, we left the physical world, the address in Capitol Hill in his home, and we traveled through space, through time, through the air. It seemed like we were traveling through the air as the small thumb-sized bodies, and they seem to be smaller bodies or smaller beings than what we are in the gross realm. But we traveled there. We sat in front of Master Babaji. And Audley said, we've come to serve, and these are some of my devoted students. And he kind of introduced all of us, and there was other students, there were other beings there. Again, no rocks or no trees and stuff. It was just in the dark void, in the space. These were beings of light, and each one of them were very, very brilliant, very lit up within their own consciousness, their own awareness. But we worked with him for a while, and we did service that he recommended on certain areas in the country. And in time, this expanded into a much larger service class, and Audley would take a whole band of beings to be of service. And I know many of the students in the various centers that have grown out of Audley's work teach the type of service class and the type of devotion, and continue those traditions today. And sometimes when I'm in the meditation, I'll see Babaji, or often see Babaji and Audley together, a very devoted flow of energy in that sense, but will be of service in however I can, or sometimes just watch and kind of be a space holder or an anchor, so that someone that may be in trouble or having difficulty in their own energy fields, things that I have no idea how to resolve or help them with, I simply ask that Audley and Babaji, other beings that are there, work with the student, help them balance the energy, and help them understand what they need to do as next. But after this experience, and sometimes it's not uncommon When you go out of body in a great deal of consciousness, when you return even by the end of the experience, I began to have an anxiety. I thought this is too strange. Not only are they describing to me what they're seeing, but I'm seeing it also. And I often see it before Audley would describe what was happening. I would see what's going on. And he assured me that it, even in that session, that it was important for me to be able to experience these things in the subtle realm and to be able to explain them or to share them with others. And to do that, and he said, it's not that we want people to come to the subtle realm and develop, sight or vision or healing powers or any of the mystical powers that can come and manifest in that level. But if they don't have that desire to want to know the inner part of their beings, they won't move through the subtle into the causal levels or into the Godhead, the God awareness. And so even though it's not the thing that we really want to teach, people need to be aware of it so that it opens the doorway and helps them to become more aware of the subtle and the devoted parts of themselves. But when I first came out of that after the anxiety, I was as quickly as I could trying to get out of the house, and assured myself as I was going out the front door that I would never return to see Audley or any of those people, because I thought they had all lost their mind, and I was in great danger of losing mine also because of all the things I had seen. But after I went home and slept, I felt much different about it and couldn't wait for the next week. And he kind of jokingly said, or laughed when he said that as I was leaving and going out the front door, and I was in quite a hurry to go out, and he said, be sure and come back next week. And I thought, oh boy, and that even frightened me more at the time. But it was just too extreme for me. It was one of the most real experiences that I had. And in a sense, it was more real in the subtle realm for me at that point than in the physical or in the gross plane. And when that happens too strongly, sometimes people even get sick at the stomach and throw up or various things. But it's experiencing the other levels, and that happens, and it's one way to go through it, but it's a way to understand and to find balance and to find your ability. But if you look at your own dreams, your own awareness, your own meditative experience, most people, when I talk to them one-on-one, share experiences that they've had that are similar, that are from subtle experiences or subtle realm energy, dream experiences. Even some people that assure me they never see anything, or they never hear anything, or they never experience anything. If I let them talk for a few minutes and just ask appropriate questions, they'll begin to share what's happening with their inner world. And the whole reason for me teaching these classes and especially sharing subtle realm experiences is to try to help you recall those experiences that you've had within your own being. And I suggest you write them down, you go back over them, you examine them very carefully. You look at the state of mind, you look at the state of consciousness that you're in when you're doing that. Can you differentiate it from the physical experience that you normally have? Do you know that it's in the subtle realm? As you move into the causal, if you really get into the Godhead and the Godhead awareness, there is no more form. It becomes formless. It becomes non-dual. All of the teaching and practice in that way. Another experience, one time I began to have see lots of visions and sleep and dream. And I went through a period of time to where the dream state was not much different than the waking state. And it was really quite a difficult time because I couldn't rest. I'd lay down to go to sleep and I'd be wide awake, walking around outside of my body. And sometimes there would be other entities or other beings that would be present, and some would be pleasant, I guess positive in that sense, and some would be frightening. And so I worked with Audley for a period of a year or two, trying to find various techniques that would help to quiet the mind and help me to sleep and to rest better, and sometimes simply ways to go to sleep. And at one point it progressed to experiences similar to what he had had when he was in early years before he had found a teacher that could help him with it. He began to have beings that would come and be very disruptive to sleep and to all sorts of things. And he said the only way he could get through it was to sleep in a sitting up posture rather than laying down. He said that seemed to help some. So I found this large chair that was very appropriate, and I literally did not sleep in a bed for almost a year. Slept in that chair sitting up, and would often concentrate with two candles. He had a lot of candle meditations, or candle, I would call it candle magic in some way, but there's a great deal of work that can be done with flames or with candles with the fire nature. But we had come up with a plan where I could place candles at either side or both sides of a mirror or of a picture of Audley, and the candles, in as long as the light was it would fill the room with kind of a golden light, and so it would allow me to peacefully go to sleep. But at one point I was having a very challenging time, and there were like winds, great winds or great energy movements that I could feel all around me, swirling motion. And I thought, well, it is Oklahoma, and there's always a lot of wind, but this was a wind inside of my apartment, not outside. And I became a clear sense that it's some type of being. And I opened my eyes and came into more awareness as I was sitting there. And then a darkness came over me and the room and the whole place. And then both candles were blown out at once. And I thought, wow, this is strange stuff. But as the candles went out, the picture that I had of Audley, which I had shown when we first opened, that picture was still lit from within. His presence was still there, very clear, very calming, and very protective. And I simply relaxed. I concentrated on his image, and then was able to come back into a stable, balanced position in consciousness, light the candles again. And there was no more disturbance of that type. And when I asked him about it the next day, he said, yeah, some of those beings can get out of hand. He said, that one won't be back. And he had the ability to do quite amazing things with energy and awareness, and to direct beings in other levels to leave his students alone. And then the title of this series of stories or lecture is None Left Behind. And I think when I first came to it, it was No Man Left Behind. It was a typical thing that you would hear in the military. It's often, every effort is made if there's a fallen soldier to recover the body and take care of the being and return them so that they could be known. And there's a great deal of effort in all military operations to leave no one behind, man or woman, in that. But my experience in this way is, after I'd been meditating for a couple of years with Audley, I would see him each week. I was in school in Stillwater, studying philosophy at Oklahoma State University, and I had come down for a lecture, and on a Monday night, and this was still at his home before we had moved to the Y, and he, as he often did with each of his students, he would ask them, how things were going, and he would kind of check in and figure out what was going on in your physical world, and wanted to know how you were doing in your studies, or how you were doing in your work, and how you were advancing, or what was happening, or where you were having problems. And he asked, then he would take care of I would say the gross, the physical body type experiences, he would kind of touch base with that. And then he said, well, how's your meditation going? And I said, well, it's been going pretty good. I meditate every day, and and I see the lights and I hear the sounds, and I said, but there was one thing that was frustrating me and kind of disturbing the last few days. And now that you mention it, and I said, I keep seeing this being when I meditate, and the being is a very white, pale skin. I said, it looks a little bit like me, but it's not me. And I said, and when I look at it, I notice that it has really kind of fiery red eyes. And but the skin is just like chalky white, and it's got these strange eyes, and he said, oh boy, he says, that's an interesting experience in meditation. He said, is there any way you could come over on Tuesday afternoon, and when you finish your studies or when you finish your work, he said, we should meditate. And I thought, wow, this is an invitation. It's a long drive, but I'll be right there. And so he said he would finish work at 4:00 on the next day, and that I should come over and meditate. And I had stopped to pick up a friend that somehow or another made me feel safer, I guess, but someone that I knew. And we went to Audley's house, and he often had a ritual that he'd go through when he would bring you over to meditate. It was always touch base, check in. He had us watch the news for a little bit, and he was always he was very curious. There was a lot of activity going on in Vietnam at the time, and he would watch the news and go along with that. And then he would say, well, what do you think they should do? Should they do nuclear weapons or what? And he was trying to draw us out, I guess. And we would have an experience or a slight discussion about it. And he was trying to see if you would get angry and how you would react. But after a while, he said, okay, let's go meditate. And so we went into his meditation room, and then he insisted that even though it was still light outside, that the light be turned off in the room. And for some reason that frightened me a great deal. And it caused a tremendous anxiety to know that the light was going to be turned out, even though the curtain was open and the sun was shining outside. But I became increasingly agitated in the sense, and he said, well, I want you to move over and sit in front of his meditation, in front of him in his meditation chair. Audley was sitting in his meditation chair, and I was sitting on the floor in front of him, and he could put his hands on my shoulder. And then the other friend was sitting over to the side in the room. And at this point, the lights were out. I was very nervous, having almost an anxiety attack. And Audley said, he hollered out to my friend and said, go get a towel. I think he's going to throw up. He could sense that my energy was being disturbed or unsettled. And my friend jumped up and came back with a washcloth. And Audley said, I said, get a towel. Better get 2 of them. I think he's going to be sick. And so he ran off into the restroom, came back with a couple of towels and spread them out in front of me. So in case I got sick, I wouldn't damage the carpet. And then at that point, things really began to change into a completely altered state for me. It was, I could see another world and another whole level of activity. Was kind of wide open in the physical, less impacted with physical, but more into the subtle realm. And as this happened, then the phone began to ring, and it was the phone call was, I insisted that we had to answer it for some reason, anything to divert or disassociate from the situation. And Audley assured me and my friend both very firmly that it was not something that had to be answered. It could be taken care of later, but it kept ringing and ringing and ringing. And finally, it was another friend of mine was having an automobile accident, and they insisted I need to come immediately. And so I was ready to get up and leave because this was getting to be too intense and more than I could handle anyway. And Audley very firmly asked me to, or told me to sit down, to be still, and to not pay any attention to it, that this was very serious stuff, and that I was under attack in an energetic way. And if I left, he might not be able to take care of me or to protect my energy field. And that brought me to a complete state of speechless immobility. And I had an extreme sense that what he was telling me was completely accurate. And at that point, then I felt this huge blow hit my life power, or my solar plexus area around the navel. And it was just like a very intense bolt of energy hit me. I went to that level and I looked, and I could see like a claw with an eagle's talon, or the talon of a bird that had a very sharp hook, 4 claws that were coming and had latched onto my life power center, and I was losing energy very quickly, and almost ready to pass out. And I was no longer concerned about throwing up. I was more concerned now about passing out. And as the being hit harder in energy and kind of repeatedly hit my energy field, Audley said, everybody, we all had to be quiet, and he was going to work on the energy. And he went deep into his own being, into the God self, and he brought down this tremendous ball of light, and he blasted that form of energy, that what I was perceiving as a claw of energy. He blasted it loose and knocked it free, and then retreated into himself. And it was so strong and intense with the energy that I could smell flesh burning. Then I began to choke again, and I again felt like I was going to throw up because it was nauseating. And at that point, he said, he was very firm, this is my student. You have no jurisdiction. You have no claim to this being, and to leave it alone. And the energy began to approach again, and I was helpless at this point. I was just floating in space, but had no ability to respond. And then as it hit me again, Audley went deeper into himself and came back in kind of a ferocious, powerful body that simply blasted everything around. It was like I guess a nuclear blast going off in the meditation room. And as that happened, the being disappeared or vanished, or withdrew completely. And simply, I knew I was protected. Audley was saying things like, it was more or less over my dead body that, you can have access to this student. So he really put down I would say, put his life on the line so that I was safe. And my experience over time was that when Audley worked with a student, or anyone that came that had a devotion or a desire to know or to have an awareness, he related to each student at their divine level, at their as their radiant God self, or the Godhead, is where he related to the student. And if they had a love or a devotion to him and to his teaching, he would do everything within his power in the universe to make sure that the student was protected, and that were taken care of, and that no matter how they may have screwed up in this lifetime or other lifetimes, or what they've attracted, he was there to try to help teach, to show the awareness, and to help you find your way, and to find the anchor back in that part of the causal self, where you can protect yourself and take care of yourself. And sometimes as we get into the subtle realm, if we identify too much in the physical, we think we're only the physical body, and we can get caught into that, and we maybe want to take pictures of ourselves all the time and post it online, so we can get feedback, we can get likes, or we can get pleasures or pain, or whatever. But in the subtle realm, when we become too obsessed there, we can actually get lost in those levels just as well as we can in the physical level. We can identify with thinking that's all that we are. We're only the subtle being, and then we're frightened by what we might see, by images, uh, by sounds, by things that we might view as beings that can take possession of a being, or do things like that. But if you identify too much with the subtle, you can get lost in that. But if you move into the causal, the Godhead, that awareness, and you retreat to that, you know that you are the source of all of these beings, all of these things that are expressing, that you can sit in that place, and you can know all things, be all things, be all powerful, be able to take care of yourself. But if you're not yet developed to a point in your awareness where you can center there, then it's very helpful to have a teacher that can help guide you in that way and take you to that place. That was my alarm. There are other stories, but I'll save those for another time. Um, if we want, you can, I guess, stop the recording at this